sometimes, not always, but sometimes folks ask, why does it take so long prior to myself and others to come around to talking about certain topics, ideals, principles, philosophies, this, that, and the other? And I'm going to give you a truthful answer to this question. Timing. Timing is everything, I feel, in essence. And then I like to examine things thoroughly. You know? It's the case that oftentimes, when we don't do a thorough examination, we can miss out on certain things. And you know, there's external pressure. People always want to externally pressure you to make determinations and decisions quickly. But you know, they say if you make a decision in haste, you could end up later regretting that decision. And that's true. The Eastern society, you know, we talk about the Western society a lot. And the East, many folks in the East, they say, you're biased against us. You never say anything about the East. Well, I wouldn't say it's a bias, but they'll say you're a Western owl. You have Western tendencies, biases, and persuasions. I won't dismiss that. I won't say that that's not accurate. But you know, we get around to discussing a lot of things, invariably. So let's talk about this now. Have you all heard this? The East has a new thing. It's called common prosperity. Yeah. Now, when I hear the word common, it's not something that arises in me. Any type of kind of phobia or positivity. It's very neutral. It's a very neutral term, common. Oh, that's pretty common that you do that. You know, it's something that's generally accepted. But we have to be very cautious. I won't say concerned, but cautious about commonality. We have to be very cautious. Why the caution about commonality? Well, suppose there's like 10 folks and you have 10 apples. And I say, well, because there's 10 of you, each one of you gets one apple. Now, everybody that's getting an apple, because there's 10 folks and everybody's getting one apple, just because I give everybody an apple and say they're common, doesn't necessarily mean everybody that got an apple, they're gonna have the same response. Yeah. If I give somebody one apple, but that doesn't satisfy them, whereas if I give another person an apple and it does satisfy them, that's not really commonality in essence. Because the person who I gave the one apple to is not going to be satisfied. Whereas the person I gave another apple to might be satisfied. So even in commonality, satisfaction varies. Yeah, it varies. What makes one person happy and satisfied, another person will be unhappy and dissatisfied. That's why commonality is very tricky and difficult. Very tricky and difficult. So when I heard about common prosperity happening in the East, I said, well, I can understand why they're doing it in essence. I really can. But I can't take kind of a definitive verdict on it as of yet. It's still too early, in my humble estimation. It has lended itself to good, positive results in the society where it's being implemented. I'm not gonna lie. You know, in the East they have extreme, extreme poverty. Western societies, we have poverty, but not to the extreme level of Eastern society. One reason, in essence, the East has such extreme poverty is because there are so many people in Eastern society, more than in Western societies. Yeah, that's a fact. You have in the East 1 billion plus Asian people. And then you have in the East 1 billion plus African people. Yeah, you add that up, that's 2 billion people right there. So the East has a lot of folks, and a lot of folks struggle. And so the governance system always tries to figure out how best to help so many folks, so many people. It's a very difficult and complex situation. You know, folks, they look at those type of situations and they're like, they don't understand it because it's not applicable in Western societies. But you have a claim being made now that in the People's Republic of China, they've eliminated extreme poverty. Yeah. In 40 years. Think about that. 4 decades. Under this type of what I would consider a new kind of formatting of communism, they've eliminated extreme poverty according to what the government tells us. Now, you know, governments have a tendency, all governments, West and East, they have a tendency to embellish and deceive us. But what is true hands down, what is true is that folks who were extremely impoverished, many of them, that's no longer the case. Because these folks are coming out saying, look, I had nothing. And when I say nothing, they really had nothing. Zilch. And now they're saying, my standard of living, it has improved. This common prosperity thing has improved my standard. That's what they're saying. And so we have to take that into examination and say, well, that is relevant and that is factual. The reason I say it's too early to make a final verdict or determination is because it's still a work in progress. It's kind of like when an artist is performing or doing some type of art. You can't say this is definitively going to be a masterpiece prior to the completion of the work. Because you have no clue, you don't know. But you can say from the outset, this is looking pretty good. We'll see how it goes. Commonality isn't necessarily intrinsically good or bad. We just know that satisfaction varies. It really does. And folks don't like commonality in the West. The West is all about individualism. It's like, I can get X, and I can have so much more than someone else, because I can do this and someone else can't. We're not all in common. We have different abilities. This is what they love to tell me, as though I'm naive and don't know this as a truth, as a factual based reality. But see, this is coming from a status and a state of ignorance. That commonality requires everyone to be equal. It doesn't. It's about a baseline standard. Yeah. There are going to be folks in the People's Republic of China who do vastly better than a lot of other folks. But what they're saying in essence is that everyone should have a baseline, a starting point, where they're not hollowed out in extreme poverty, left to starve and suffer in misery. That's really the key principle of common prosperity. Yeah. In Western society, it's about consumption and greed, really, in essence. And people intertwine consumption and greed with individualism. I get it myself. But if you take a closer examination, as we like to do, that's not necessarily the case. Because whatever you acquire, it was done through most likely exploitation of a lot of other folks. Meaning you properly didn't compensate folks for what they did to acquire your riches for you. Yeah, it was exploitation. At the tail end of it, you didn't really do a fair transaction. Because if I'm making you millions and you're only paying me a couple of hundreds, that's a vast difference. And I'm the one generating your larger capital. Yeah. Your capital inflow is being generated by my productivity. The haves and the have-nots. That's a Western and Eastern societal issue and problem. The East says there should be a baseline, and that the have should kind of, well, not consume and be so greedy and not leave out the folks who made their profits possible. Cut them in on a better deal. Yeah. Common prosperity. Now the West, I would imagine, because I'm of Western persuasion, the West does not like commonality. Yeah, that type of terminology is abhorrent to Western philosophical thought. I don't want to be seen as equal with someone else. I don't want commonality. That's what the West will say. But then the West doesn't acknowledge that others made whatever they obtained possible. They kind of overlook the commons. Yeah. And so when it comes to the commons, there's a lack of really proper funding and proper appreciation. Whatever you make in whatever society, you have to have roads to provide the commerce, right? The roads have to be maintained by certain folks, right? Transportation is a common thing. That's something that all of us use in the society, no matter how affluent or how poor we are. We all have to traverse. So it's a common. Electricity. These are commons. We need electricity in order to provide all of us what we need to obtain. Yeah, so that's a common. So there are tools in the society that are utilized by all of us for our common prosperity. It's just that the West doesn't like to acknowledge the commons. And for the longest time, the East had a struggle in terms of finding balance. Yeah. So when I hear the word commonality, I really don't necessarily have strong feelings. It doesn't give me positive or negative feelings. It's a very neutral kind of terminology. Where the East could go with common prosperity, yeah, it's endless. The road is endless. But I caution folks that whenever you start saying common and you use the term commonality, it's going to irk a lot of people, no matter what society, East or West. Because then some folks are going to say, well, I could have more if it weren't for systems and structures in place to impede me consuming and making more things. It's a broader sacrifice for the betterment of the common. Yeah. And you know, folks, generally in all societies, they don't like sacrificing. Why should I only make 5 million when you and I both know I can make 10 million? Well, if you make 10 million, somebody else is not going to have $2. If you make 5 million, somebody else can be lifted out of abject poverty. But making that case to somebody that's consumed by consumption and greed is difficult. It really is. It's not easy. Because that natural urge and beast in us is to always consume. Yeah. We're like the blob. We'll get and consume everything in sight until there's nothing left. Yeah. And that's destructive to the society too. You know, you'll cut down all the trees, and then you'll have deforestation and wildfires and all types of climate catastrophes. But that was done based off of the more trees we cut down, the more profits we can make. Consumption at the expense of the common society. And those type of choices can have lasting ramifications on all of us. You know, the East says common prosperity. I'm not sold on commonality. It's not that it's not a good concept. That's not why I'm not sold on it. I know that what's going to satisfy one individual is not going to satisfy another. This is a truth, a fact, a reality that we've all got to kind of live with. But the West is not prone to sharing. Now, even if I didn't believe in commonality, I do kind of have a principled belief in sharing. You know, they used to say this in Western society. They don't say it anymore. Sharing is caring. Yeah, they used to say that. Sharing is caring. But because the West is so engulfed in greed, that there's no more sharing, and there's a lack of caring, due to a lack of sharing. There's this type of hoarding mentality. I'll take all the resources and hoard it for myself. And I'll charge atrocious fees because I know you need these things. Basic necessities of life, as they call it. And this is what's transpired in the West. And this has led to great turmoil, division, anger, violence, greed, and consumption, and hoarding. There's no sharing in the West. There's no sense of even the commons, let alone prosperity for many of us. This is really the East's chance to shine. Now, whether they get it right or not, that's up to them. I told you all, in this, we always remain neutral. I'm not going to say one is better than the other. I'm going to tell you what one is and what the other is. Decisions and choices are for individuals to make. We can advise, but it's for you all to consent. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should always be. I don't believe in telling folks, this is what you must do. Because when you do those type of things, I mean, you could do it. I could do that. But when I think to do it, I say, well, folks are going to do what they want to do anyway, right? You know, you can tell somebody this is a brilliant idea. And the idea might be brilliant and it might be successful. But certain folks are still going to say, I'm not going to do it. So ultimately, decisions are always left best up to the individual. But you have to look at concepts and thoroughly examine them. See if they're useful. And just because you see something being done somewhere and it has a use case in that location, it might not have a use case somewhere else. It might not be successful somewhere else. And then you can take something that someone else does and adapt it, mold it, and shape it, and make it work for you. It could be completely different than what they do. You know, if the West doesn't want to do common prosperity, that's perfectly okay and fine with me. But I think the West should come into some type of enlightenment concerning the commons. You know, we can all look around and we can see that the commons are not adequately up to par in Western society. And we can also see that there's a lack of sharing and caring. Yeah, these things are true. And the fact that we don't have as many folks as the East has, and yet we're having rising and increasing levels of severe poverty, that should be cause for concern. folks that are policymakers should really pause and reflect and ask themselves, what is it about this society that's causing these types of severe depressive disparities? There are mechanisms and tools that are completely different than what the East uses that the West could use. Yeah, absolutely, there are. But in all societies, when you talk about commonality or sharing, there has to kind of be a willingness. Yeah, there has to be a willingness to go along with it. So I would imagine with common prosperity in the East, the policymakers have had to drag certain folks screaming and kicking towards this new approach. I would imagine it's difficult, tremendously difficult to do. It's not easy. But, doing something that's difficult and folks being upset because it is difficult, that, in my estimation, is not a reason not to do something. A lot of times folks will use the difficulty index as an excuse to not do something that's necessary. Well, this is going to be difficult. In the West, they say it's going to be a heavy lift. But if it's necessary, no matter how heavy the lift, it's got to be done. I don't think common prosperity would work in Western societies. We're just not on that type of frequency. But sharing, that's something that folks are attuned to, or used to be. Nowadays, not so much. But you can make something old new again. You really can. Something that used to be a standard practice, you can make it a standard practice again. Yeah. You have to have fortitude and courage to do it, though. The West is kind of, it lacks fortitude and courage. It knows that many folks in its society now have a lack of empathy. Yeah. The West lacks empathy. The East has figured out that if it's somewhat empathetic to its common goals, its common society, that this will maneuver it and surpass the West. Only time will tell, really, in essence. But I thought we should at least begin this discussion. Common prosperity. Now, commonality is tricky. Suppose I have 10 folks and I have 10 apples and I give each one an apple. There's going to be one person that says, wait, why is everybody getting one apple? I can eat 2 or 3 and still not be satisfied. this is not fair to me. I require more than someone else. Yeah? And then you have to go into the broad-based topic of, well, sharing is necessary. Because if we don't share, somebody else will have nothing. Do you really want to see that person starve? Yeah. Some folks would say, yes, I do. I don't care. Yeah. But that's how bad it's gotten in Western societies. No empathy whatsoever. Or very little. It's very teeny tiny nowadays. Yeah. And so we should be very cautious about this encroachment of commonality. Yeah. The West will say, oh, we'll all be satisfied and common when we're in poverty. But if we're being completely honest, most of us are already impoverished in Western and Eastern society. Yeah, we have a commonality of being impoverished already. This is a fact. People want to try to gloss over this, and they'll say, I have more trinkets than you, so therefore I'm better than you. But gadgets and trinkets are just that. They're toys. When you look at the broader outlook, you're impoverished. Yeah. And I think folks are starting to come to that realization. Slowly but surely, folks are starting to come to that realization in Western society. But I'm cautious about this commonality that the East wants to talk about. And you have to be very cautious with these types of principles. You have to be able to look at it clear of emotion. You know, when we talk about these things, people get so emotional. And their emotions cloud their reason and judgment. Yeah. They'll say, this is bad because this is communism and socialism, and, you know, I don't let my emotions get in the way of good reason and judgment. Whatever the operating system is, I erase that. It's not present when I look at something and make an examination. I look at benefits and drawbacks to everything. Commonality has a benefit, but it has drawbacks too. It doesn't take into the account satisfaction. Yeah. So if there's some type of mechanism, some type of satisfaction mechanism interwoven into commonality, then it's really perfect. So we'll see once the artist finishes their art if they include that. It's inclusive. Yeah, if there's some type of satisfaction index. And you know, you're not going to ever be able to satisfy everyone. Our art doesn't satisfy everyone. Some people will say, I don't like this art piece, but you'll have 10 other people say, I do. So you have to look at things from, well, the vantage point that if the majority of folks are benefiting and there's a minority who are also benefiting, but they're angry that they're not just lording over all the rest of us in the society, then that concern doesn't have as much merit anymore. So satisfaction, it's necessary to have that mechanism. And once that mechanism is in place, we can see whether it's being abused or not by certain folks. Yeah. Kind of like a check and a balance. Yeah, you need checks and balances. Absolutely. You know, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's also why we're very cautious about commonality. They'll say, come on, this is it. This is going to be beneficial to everyone. But who's going to make those ultimate determinations? Are they themselves going to implement commonality for themselves? Yeah, all these questions must be asked, must be examined thoroughly. But it's kind of a good start. It's kind of a good outlook to at least be concerned about the common society. And so I would say kudos to the East. Yeah, kudos to them. The concern is there. It's adequate and it's there. Yeah. Sadly, I can't say the same is true for Western societies at the moment. There's no concern for the common society. None whatsoever. And so that's why Western societies are devolving. They're not evolving, they're devolving. This is true if we look at the broad landscape. You can look at pockets and jurisdictions and say things are going smoothly, things are going well. But that's kind of looking at the forest without trees. Yeah? Same concept, same principle. That part of the forest over there has trees, so we're fine. Not mentioning that the vast majority of the forest now is treeless. So this is what the West will do. Yeah. Common prosperity. They said you have to talk about this. It's all the rage in the East. And because you have this Western bias, this bent towards the West, you overlook us. You don't acknowledge us. But we see the East. We're familiar with the East. You know, I can go both ways. It's not a problem for me. They say you're so bent towards the west that you can't look in the east direction. I'm familiar with the east. Highly familiar with the east. You know, before I was west, I was east. So the east should kind of remember that. But you know, there's memory and movement that forgets things in the east just like the west. They say you were always western. But that's not true. When you were in the east, ask around. Folks will tell you.